Welcome to Climate Courage. My name's Andrea Edwards.
My name is David Coe.
And at the far end, as usual, you have me, Richard Busellato. Welcome.
Welcome and good morning. We're waiting for our guest who will be joining us. Richard, why don't you get us started?
Exactly. I mean, today's episode, we're actually going to talk about the politics of climate, which seems eminently pertinent as it's the closing day of COP29. Mm-hmm. And what better than to talk about the politics around the whole area than on this particular day? So, first of all, it's worth noting that 2023, which was by any standard the hottest year on record, will literally be confined to the dustbins of history when 2024 numbers are finally in, because it will smash that record by a significant amount unless we have a December that is completely out of proportion. It's also a year where more than 1.5 billion people have been going to the polls. And the most significant and famous one and media one was obviously the US presidential election. So that seems like something we're going to touch upon again. And we also have a very important guest who we're waiting for to join us. But until then, let's kick off with some of the news we've had happening around the globe this fortnight.
And I reckon we asked David to kick it off this week. He's been very active in the last couple of weeks. And I noticed, David, you've actually also attracted a few trolls to your posts. How are you coping with that?
I actually kind of been doing that for a while and finding it's quite interesting getting their responses personally. And I find, how should I put this? You know, we talk about the politics, we talk about the swing, which is very disconcerting. A lot of people, I've got some friends in America completely devastated and thinks the world's going to end in that way. And, you know, and I think that hidden behind all the trolling is this aspect where we go through these process of grief, essentially. You know, there's a significant kind of disturbance to the force, as it were, and it's really disconcerting. And so you get all these things that come along. And honestly, I think the best thing about them that it prompted was Richard yesterday when we were having a conversation. He says, you know, you can't short the market when it's already crashed. And which is the whole aspect of this. You can't wait for all the evidence and everything to come in before you say, you know, now it's time to go and take action. You got to do that ahead of all the evidence being in, because you have to feel actually which way is it going to go. And then, you know, there are always some element of uncertainty involved. And we live in the world of great uncertainty. And the best way to manage to protect yourself along is to do what is kind of the right thing for you in that way. And I think that's part of what they're expressing too. But jumping out from there, onto the news, onto the events, and I have been quite active in that because I thought, you know, COP, I want to get active again and so on. It's this aspect where the demands are getting stronger because the fear is getting stronger, and the fear is getting stronger is because everything is happening and it's all coalescing all together. So what you have is you've got more typhoons over in Philippines hitting now into the main island as well. Usually goes further north and it's now coming further south. You've got the typhoons hitting Taiwan, and the one before last hit it from the west side as opposed from the east side, which is the normal path. And the problem with that is the semiconductor manufacturing is on the west side. You had Hurricane Milton following swiftly after Helene. And the aspect of that hit the news for a few days is Spruce Pine, this small place in North Carolina. I think it's like 2,000 people as a population, but it produces 70% of high quality quartz, the silicon that we use to make semiconductors. And it basically kind of took that place. You know, there were roads that were damaged and all of that coming from there. And it just shows the fragility, you know, of how our whole industrial process to get today, we talk about the AIs and all those things. They all need those semiconductor chips. Your car needs it. Your toaster today needs it. So everything is based on those things. And it's 70% of that material is concentrated in one small place which get hit by hurricanes. It didn't get hit before, but the hurricane paths are changing. And on top of all those things, what you have is, of course, the conflicts that are going on. Everything is escalating up. The conflict in the Middle East, the conflict with Russia and Ukraine is all escalating up. And the trade tariff escalations is going to come along, and all the places are preparing to just put up barriers and protect themselves. So we are kind of not at all in a good place politically. So I think that's kind of part of the fear that underlies a lot of that trolling.
Yeah. I saw a TED talk, and the guy was talking about climate deniers. It's an Australian guy who put on some theatre production. And what he actually realized was climate deniers actually understood the full implications of the climate and were responding in fear to those implications, whereas the majority of people don't understand the full implications. When I talk to people about the implications, you can see that they're just, even though they believe in climate change and biodiversity loss and all the issues, they actually haven't thought through. So I'll give you an example with the Philippines. So they've had 4 typhoons in 10 days or 11 days or something, right? And I was speaking to someone who's very, very dear to me in the Philippines, and they've got a farm, and it's been in the family for a couple of generations, and they've lost all of their rice crops, all of their vegetables, they've lost everything. I saw a tweet, but I haven't been able to find any news on it, that the Ministry of Agriculture in the Philippines is now looking at importing food. So once they start to import food, it obviously gets even more expensive, and it's already expensive. The farmers in the Philippines are really suffering. They're not making enough money to even do what they need to do. A lot of the farming land has been sold for luxury villas to be built. But if they're reliant on, and they've got a partnership with Vietnam, but Vietnam's also being extremely hit, especially with heat. And, rice crops after 35 degrees Celsius start to fail, and that's one of the hottest places I've ever been in the summertime. It's excruciating. So China, we'll just get our food from China, but China's also been hit with extreme weather events. And so to me, this is when you talk about the accumulation, David, this is the accumulation. And I can see the Philippines is now moving very swiftly onto the front lines, and it's going to be very, very desperate there for a lot of, it's already very desperate for a lot of people, but it's going to become even more desperate. So I'm extremely concerned about what's going to be happening in the Philippines in the coming months, years, from a climate perspective, but the bigger perspective of starvation, food security, those sort of issues. So, yeah.
You talk about crops, and it's definitely, the farming news is generally that, it's become very sporadic as to which place is actually doing okay and which one is actually suffering either from flood or from drought as a result. And you've got some states in the US which are slightly ahead with winter planting, and then you've got others which are just devastated. They're not even getting the emergence of the crops that they planted along. So all of that is going to feed in the next period into our food prices. And that's the reality of it. I think one of the comments I got was about how inflation is always a monetary effect only if you have production as normal, not when your production is squeezed.
Yeah. And then, of course, in Europe and the UK, you're going to be impacted by the floods in Spain, which have decimated crops, right? And I mean, do you guys have any thoughts of why do you think people can't get these ideas into their head? It's, they seem incapable of looking beyond and looking ahead at, if this is happening over here and this is happening over here, and, rice crops, wheat crops, war is impacting as well. But people don't seem to be able to sort of do the maths of, if this happens, that means this, and this. And, we saw the US election result. And I think a lot of the reasoning that I've heard about why it came out the way it came out, I don't necessarily agree with. But if economics and the price of eggs was at the center of the conversation, it means that they don't actually understand that the reason the price of eggs was so high when inflation was low was because, these other things. What do you have any thoughts on why people just aren't getting it?
I think I'm going to start, and then Richard goes on, because I think Richard always comes in with this sort of slamming kind of honesty.
Brutal. Honest and brutal. That's me.
I like.
And I think from my side, I think a lot of it is not that people don't necessarily get it. I think there are different things. I think that actually, we need to do a course for journalists. I think journalists, when you see the reporting, one of the things I've been posting about is just generally how people try to represent what should be rather than basically what is first. So there is a sense in some ways of how do you make the narratives kind of palatable, or how do you say what it is, and so on. And one of the key thing I posted this week was about the projected emission curves, and they're just wrong. They should, the genuine projected emission curves, the one place which has what I believe is the most realistic emission curve is from the US Energy Agency. And because they don't try to say you need to cut emissions down to this target, they just say this is what we see is going on and our projection. And we have a high growth scenario, we have a medium growth scenario, a low growth scenario. And you see where you yourself are with that growth scenario, and then you pick which one you think is right. And that's a real eye opener and makes you start thinking, actually, where do I want to sit? Whereas the ones which try to say, here is what we need to get to 1.5, here is what current policies are, supposedly, and those sort of things, what they do is they give the idea that actually government's going to fix it. And our failure is not governments don't want to fix it, but they're running out of money.
Yeah.
And in response to that, people start worrying about, you take the UK, the inheritance tax has basically gone up for everybody, or for farmers, because they've actually taken away a piece of inheritance tax protection for farmers. But for everyone else, they've kept the threshold limit the same, which means that with prices going up, the inheritance actually gone up. The inheritance tax has actually gone up. And that's what happens when governments run out of money. So as a response, people start thinking about, I want my government to protect me in my immediate daily thing first. And I think that's part of the swing to the right that we're seeing. And the very left narrative is going on about how there are these big problems, we need to resolve them. But they're almost gone to the stage of saying, everybody's got to suffer for us to solve these. And that's not really the way actually of saying, look, the reality is this, you got to figure out, where you are, and then come and tell us what policies, and so that we can actually help you. Richard, I'm not sure.
Yeah, obviously we share very similar thoughts, but I think there is something virtually related to human DNA. If we look and we say, how does human respond to danger? Where it's clear imminent present danger is fight or fly. And those scenarios and those situations, humans are actually very good at tackling. When it's a slow moving, creeping event, we're actually very bad at it. It's the boiling frog syndrome. We don't react in time because we don't get hurt enough quickly. And the same applies to gratification. If you have politicians saying, I can fix it now, I can regulate those prices, I can put in caps on your energy bill or whatever, it's like, gee, more money in the pocket. But, I'm effectively doing my children and grandchildren in because they're going to pick up the tab by having much higher expenses down the road. So if you're in your 80s and you're very selfish, it might actually be the totally irrational thing to do because you're not going to be around to pick up the tab. We are probably young enough that we're going to pick up a large part of that tab, but ultimately the weight of these policies will ultimately fall on the shoulders of our children and grandchildren, where things will be really expensive because we fail to take the action for long-term prosperity, looking for immediate near-term gains with things like, a politician is promising you lower prices, but you don't actually think through what that means for the long haul. So I think you have this short-term versus long-term dilemma, which is in politics really, really difficult to solve because the election cycle is not long enough in that sense. But I might obviously turn out to be wrong. But I think it's all actually linked together with the political cycle failing to have the mandate to do what is necessary over 10, 20, 30, 40 years, because none of the politicians and policymakers around will actually necessarily see the fruit of those decisions. So we go with near-term things that is probably compounding every problem we have around.
Yeah.
I would like to see a pictogram of these cause-effect leads. So there's a couple of things here, right? One is taxation. There's an obvious opportunity here. The G20 or Brazil are pushing for 2% tax on anyone who earns over $1 billion. I suggest 10% tax. Every time you get on a plane, it should cost you more money, and that extra money. So if you're flying for the very first time, fine, you pay the cost of the flight. But every time so it's like the frequent flyers, but in reverse. Private jets. I know in the UK they're increasing taxation on private jets. To me, it's just. But the other thing is the mandate. There can't be a mandate if they're not even having the honest conversation. So there was lots of conversation around why didn't the Democrats talk about climate change? Well, if they had talked about climate change, they would have lost the election. There's no point talking about something if you're going to lose and then you can't do anything about it. So but I think surely we're at the point now where you can't get a mandate if you don't talk about it, and it's time to do that. But the other side of thing is I live in Asia, where long-term thinking has been in play. Singapore has been preparing for climate change for 40 years. The drains, the way the buildings, the housing development board, where the 80% of the population lives in apartments that they own, they're sustainably built now. I mean, construction is not sustainable in any sense of the imagination, but sustainability is at the heart of everything that they do. So they make these decisions and everyone comes on board. They don't talk about it. You don't hear Singapore talking about what it's doing. It's not bragging. It just gets on with it because that's the culture in Asia, right? But then you go to the poorer countries in Asia where they know they have to do something because they're on the front lines, but they don't necessarily have the funds to do it. So the wealthiest families in those countries could come together and start putting that wealth back into the community. So I don't know. How can you have a mandate if you're not talking about it?
Yeah, I think there's, it goes down to a couple of things. So we got a comment about, Hannah Ritchie's book, Not the End of the World. And that sort of says, we don't need to panic so much about it. And the point, I read that book, and the point I've got about it goes back to our book that Richard and I are talking about. It is a question of money and what drives the money. All the solutions and approaches that basically Hannah Ritchie talks about essentially relies on the world being able to deploy and invest the money. But where that money comes from is largely our pensions. It's people hoarding in order to try and protect the last third of their lives. Mm-hmm. And the more the future is uncertain, the more people hoard, the more they demand the returns as a result. And that ultimately takes the distribution away, and it increases the pressure that we have on the planetary boundaries, as we see. And that's we try to express that in the unsustainable truth, but that part of it also explains what's going on with the government and their ability to try and raise the funds for this at the moment. You have a situation where you take the UK, it has increased taxes and it has increased debt with the new government coming in, trying to do all the things. And as it does that, all the people here are saying, okay, fine, how is that going to help me first in that way? And as governments are structured there to look after their people first. And they do that, as Richard says, over an electoral cycle, not over the longevity of a family and its heritage. That's not how governments think, and that's not how they work. They basically got, for the UK government, they got 2 years before they have to start planning how they pitch their next election in that way. That's why the what's it 2025 in the US is actually trying to say we want politics to last forever, just on our terms. I mean, lots of people don't like their terms about it, but they're actually trying to break that electoral cycle in that way. And saying if we could break that electoral cycle, then we'll have better politics. I mean, okay, fine. You don't, I can't say I'm the favorite person to go and bring up the flags for that particular politics, but their motivation is there. Their motivation is to make the politics into something that can be more lasting than the immediate, 2 year to the next election cycle. In that way. And it goes back down to that part, as just to reiterate again, we all want to be sure we can have a comfortable future. We find it very hard to accept that we can't have any certainty over that. And as a result, we hoard the money rather than say, if we're going to lose it anyway, let's find the best way to spend it.
All right, so we've got Rob. He's saying he doesn't know how to get on. So I'm just going to excuse me while I send in the link.
You are excused, Andrea. We look forward to having Rob coming with us online. And
so
yeah, I'm not entirely sure how you deal with this issue, but I think it sits very much at the heart of everything we see going on. And, I have different thoughts every day. Some of them admittedly not great. And I tend to discard them. But what I do see, though, is actually that there are very, very few people thinking about these things. We have kind of accepted a parliamentary or a presidential cycle of 4 or 5 years as the norm, with all the limitations that David is describing. If you have a 4-year cycle, you have maximum 2 years you can do anything. And I don't think that is optimum for the world in any sense, because it leads inevitably to an extreme amount of short-sightedness in all the policies that are being implemented.
So it's our democracies as well as our business quarterly. So I'm sitting here with the PAP's been in charge for 50 years. And it works, right? So my Joe on the No Show, he always talks about we need a benevolent dictator. Let's hope Robert can get on. He's got the link. He's given us a thumbs up. So, but big corps have longer perspective. How do we engage these decision makers?
Well, actually, big corps don't have long perspective.
Well, they do. So SoftBank in Asia has got like 30, 40-year vision. So I agree that
by people with a term. I mean, their vision is not a genuine vision. My vision for my family allows the family to be different as we progress. My vision for my family is one based on allowing my children and their children to be able to make their own choices. Big corps is about how I persist and actually apply what I think is right to the world in that way. Yeah. That's very different. And that's the coercive and manipulative.
So I just thought Robert's here, and while we've got him, we should grab him. And I'm gonna bring him up in a minute. So this is Robert Redmayne Hosking, and I met him on the Climate Crisis Club, which happens every Saturday night on Twitter. It's Saturday night for me, not necessarily Saturday night for everybody else. It's a global club. I find it really inspiring. It's actually my sanity check. And Robert's one of my favorite speakers. He's extremely passionate. And so let's bring him up. Here he is. We got you.
I'm here finally, Andrea, and it's great to meet you, all of you guys, and to see you all. I appreciate you being here. Hello. I must apologize, actually, if I'm slightly blurry-eyed. It's 7 here in the UK, and I'm still trying to get myself a little bit more, how can I put it? Awake, maybe, is one of the words I'm looking for.
I know, it's cruel. I'm sorry.
What time is it where you are, Andrea? May I just ask again? So
it's just after 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and one of the reasons I wanted to do this time is a lot of the conversation around these topics happens in the Northern Hemisphere. And it's, you know,
Absolutely.
most of them are 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning for us out here. So I wanted to do it at a time that was good for this region, because we need to be having these discussions. So I'm sorry we had to drag you out of bed, and I know it's cold
quite
over
all
there.
right, Andy. I just want to try to be as flexible mentally as I can, even though it's too early-ish for me. But and I don't particularly look too good because probably my hair's all over the place. But that's another matter. The politics of climate. I have so much to say, as you probably all know from my work on X. There is a lot.
For those who don't know you, sort of talk about what you do, because
Okay,
you're our most
yeah.
activist actors.
Yeah, absolutely, Andrew. I've been a lifelong conservationist and appreciator of environmental issues for the last 40 plus years. And I've grown up loving nature in all its capacity. I actually decided to join X, or formerly Twitter, in 2018 and start doing some climate activism completely by accident, really. I can tell you something, that the climate activism actually came from being inspired by Greta's actions, believe it or not. And I thought, I need to do something positive here in climate action. So that's why the climate and environmental part of me came to pass, as it were. So that's how that bit started. But my lifelong appreciation of ecological and nature issues has been with me for decades. And I believe actually in a planet that's free from pollution and free from the ravages of the collapse that we are seeing all around us by the second, and which continue to grow stronger by the day. And sorry, I'm diversifying here again.
That's good.
Yeah, sorry, Andrea. You were going to say something then, weren't you?
No. Yeah, no. That's cool.
Okay.
No, I enjoy watching what you do. All right, so let's get stuck into. We've just got some sort of core sort of topics we want to cover with you today, and let's see where it takes us. Richard,
absolutely. Yeah, sorry, have I got the floor to speak again? I wasn't sure then for a minute. Yeah.
No.
Richard's got a question for you.
Yeah, hello. Hello.
Hello. I think it would be great if you start out by sort of giving us an overview, what it is you're doing and the actual work you're involved with right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my work primarily on X is to actually educate people to the climate emergency and to actually bring governments to accountability and media to accountability to start reporting on this crisis with the intensity that needs to be done. I'm afraid to say that there is such a blinded lack of, how can I say, complete disbandment to understanding the depth of the crisis at this very moment in every government capacity, and politicians who are just blindly walking, over this extinction by the day and not doing what's needed to be done. We need a complete reform in the way the mechanics of policies are actually put in place by our respective global governments. I've been saying this for quite a while, and what a majority of the work I do on X, apart from raising awareness and issues, which is primarily what I do on X, this is what I'm trying to explain, is to bring accountability to the people who are the destroyers and the polluters. Accountability not just from getting the general public to finally wake up in a capacity in their millions and billions if necessary, in order to push forward the radical action necessary. Because you see, the thing is, the way I see it at the moment, our systems are diseased with the way that they actually function. You can't expect our current global economic systems and our current global systems to be able to work in a capacity to actually get on board with taking this crisis seriously if you've got a media that's in denial to the actual climate crisis. Have you noticed that usually when global media report in any capacity on this climate crisis, they look at it in a relaxed and totally unsubjective way? They don't even see it as an emergency. They just see it, oh, it's a bit of extreme weather, it's a bit of bad weather. They don't even see the fact of what is actually going on. And this is one of the reasons why my role in X is actually as an educator and an informer primarily. This is what I'm trying to say to the actual crisis that we've got. So in answer to your question, is it Richard? Is that right?
Yeah.
Thanks, Richard. Sorry, my brain in the morning sometimes is a bit flummoxed. This is what I'm trying to answer your question here, and saying that that's what my primary goal is in the work that I do on X, is to educate people and to also bring accountability to anybody necessary for the ravages of this crisis that are going on at the present time.
But that I think inevitably leads us to the next question. Which is, what is your initial reaction to the Trump election? Or Trump being elected president?
I'll tell you something. I'm seethingly angry, to be honest with you, that I think that a mass majority of the American people can be so blinded by the ability of a man who is totally ignorant to this crisis that is going on around us. I mean, Trump's ignorance is absolutely breathtaking and unforgivable. I'm livid about it. To be honest with you, I'm absolutely sick to the back teeth of seeing people being, how can I put it? They've been brainwashed so easily by a man that does not appreciate climate science in any capacity. He doesn't appreciate the ecological disaster that is happening across our planet that's getting worse by the day. And in my mind, that's unforgivable. How in God's name we could have got to a stage where we actually have a president, the most powerful man on earth, being a climate denier and continuing to be an open climate denier, as though it's some sort of trophy to band around, as though it's something wonderful. It just absolutely, totally makes me sick. I hope I'm not being too raging here about it, but I tell you something, I am absolutely, it's deplorable that a man could be put in a position of power like this at this particular time in the crisis that we have across our planet, that is a climate denier. It's totally unforgivable, I have to say. And, the fact, the implications for the American people are so dire that they can barely be put into words. We are going to see state after state in America underwater. We're going to see more intensified hurricanes. We're going to see more intensified typhoons. We're going to see more intensified extreme weather. If the American people think that they've had problems now with extreme weather, just wait and see what you've got coming to you in the next 5 years, because believe me, what you've seen so far will just be a picnic. It really is. This is just, it's unforgivable to have a president like this that's been put in this position.
I want to say that I think you're being too kind.
I'm not being. I haven't ravaged enough yet, to be honest with you.
No, the one thing that's possible.
I haven't even scratched the surface.
The thing I would say is forget. I can't speak for the American people in any way, whatever. But I do think that actually Trump knows. He's well aware. He just chooses not to pay.
You're probably right there, actually.
And my sense as well, that he's not as ignorant about these issues as you would on the face of it believe, but actually he just don't care. This is
one of the unforgivable things, actually, to be honest with you, the fact of that abandonment of responsibility.
Yes,
I can't forgive that. I just can't forgive it. We have at this very moment, we have millions of lives in danger by the day, and getting worse with this level of crisis that we've got. And here we have a man who openly thinks that it's cool or whatever to be in this state of mind, to be in this sense of abandonment, this sense of dangerous irresponsibility that I find so maddening, so annoying, that it just it really does. The next few years under a Trump presidency is going to be so dire, not just for the American people, but for all countries and all people. This crisis does not respond to that type of mentality. And physics doesn't do bargains with the Republican Party. Physics doesn't do bargains with MAGA. We have a state here where physics is dictating what will happen with the extreme weather events across our planet. And believe me, physics will have the last say in the word, as it always does. Mother Nature will have the last say.
We've got a physicist here, Robert, with David.
Yeah.
But is it Gusta? Is that how you say his name? He hopes that Trump becomes
Gusta.
Gusta.
Yeah, thank you.
Negative catalyst of insight and change. And I'm kind of hoping for that too. That the rest of the world says, "All right, let's go."
I've got to be honest with you. Sorry, Gustav. Sorry, did I interrupt you then? Apologize if I did.
No, I think, you know, we know the path of this presidency because, you know, you take Elon Musk, right? You know, kind of who's elected along supposedly for government efficiency. So what does he do? He chooses a name that's an acronym for a digital currency he owns and has always said he owns to promote it. And governments, when the first action of the people who are selected into that government is to promote their own good, is to benefit their own good, then you know how the rest of it is going to go.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I completely agree with you, Gustav, about that. You see, sorry, Andrea. Sorry.
I was just going to say the focus on Trump, just only Trump, just around him, not even his cabinet picks, but all around him and behind him. You know, I was reading about one of the think tank groups, what's it's called, Rock something, that J.D. Vance started. And J.D. Vance has been pretty quiet since the election, you know, and he's obviously backed by Thiel and a few other people. And I think there's things going on in the background that aren't getting our attention, that probably require our attention. And, you know, Trump's a 78-year-old man. You know, he's obviously, you know, he's not doing too well from a cognitive perspective. But I almost don't see him as the threat. I see that next layer is the much, much bigger threat, and the tech bros. I was in the technology industry most of my life and seeing what so many of, not all of them obviously, but so many of them are doing and what they're pushing for. And so their wealth, their success is more important than human rights. And, I kind of find that quite disgusting, the crypto boys, they're in the mix as well. So there's a lot of aspects to this that goes beyond Trump.
You're absolutely right there, Andrea. Some great points from you. I couldn't agree with you more. The situation we find ourselves in now, that Trump is obviously the figurehead, if I may put it like that. I think it describes it perfectly, of the Republican Party as it is at the moment, and the fact of his inauguration in January. But he is not the only issue. We have far deeper issues here. We have a deeper issue with the way of mentality perspectives of everyone within the Republican Party, which I suspect quite deeply at the moment, I have to say, and for good reason as well. Also, obviously MAGA is a very, very dangerous threat to the people of America, good, decent, hardworking people, and not just the people of America, but the people of our planet in general, if I may say. And those key things are things that are going to have to be dealt with in ways of being able to, of context, of being able to get through this crisis with this lack of vision and this lack of mentality that's all embracing those particular, people at this present time. I will also, sorry, was I interrupting somebody then?
Sorry, no, I was going to throw something into what you were saying, in terms of how politics is and what it might change and what it needs to be. In a sense, I think the anchoring, the pivoting is even greater than most people realize, because Keir Starmer posted onto Twitter X a comment to say, this was a few hours ago, I'm determined to deliver growth, create wealth, and put more money in people's pockets. And the point is, the costs are going to keep rising. You can keep trying to put money into people's pockets, but the way money works in this world as it's going is always going to be lagging behind the cost rising.
Absolutely.
So the politics that's driven, as Trump says, and Keir Starmer's statement here and everywhere else, on putting money in people's pockets is ignoring actually costs are going to keep rising. So what you end up doing is you end up in this impossible chase. And this is the repivoting of the politics. You know, how do we pivot it so that we can think about how people can thrive rather than we can just simply put money in people's pockets? Because thriving captures this part that actually I need to take into account the cost.
Absolutely, good.
All these
I can totally agree.
So you're both breaking up a little bit.
Sorry, am I breaking up or was it good?
No. You were talking over each other when you broke up. It's all right.
I thought David was breaking up slightly.
Yeah.
But maybe it was my link, but I thought he was breaking up.
Yeah.
I always try to not talk over somebody, but sometimes
that's all right.
It happens. It's a lively debate, and we want it that way. So
exactly.
You're right. Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more, to be honest with you.
Can we move on to green politics? Because it's something I've heard you talk about a lot, Robert, and I always really enjoy what you've got to say. Because at this point in political evolution, we would presume that green political parties would have gained a more dominant position. So I know in the UK, I think you picked up 2 green seats in the last general election.
Yeah.
But in the EU, they had a massive loss, and obviously Jill Stein in the US, she attracted a lot of controversy. So, like, if you were talking to, because I know you do talk to a lot of the Green politicians, if you were talking to someone who was either already a politician or thinking about moving into that, what would your advice be to them? What do they need to do differently? Because they're obviously not succeeding.
No, this is one of the key issues. Let me speak just subjectively a second in terms of green policies in the United Kingdom. Although this will reflect every country's way that they tackle green policies now and in the future, in my opinion. I think what the Green Party are not doing right at the moment, although they are a big party in their own right, and they are pushing subjectively with what they're trying to do for the greater good of environment and climate. I think what they need to do now, my advice to anyone within the Green Party at this very moment, continuing advice, would be to actually change the way that your mechanisms are and your systems are within the way that your party functions at the moment. Because I still feel that only picking up 2 green seats is saying a lot for the way that the entire function of the party works, wouldn't you say? I think now people who are working within the Green Party, I think we have to challenge issues in a different way. I think we have to put key objectives into a different context. They have to be redefined. They have to be actually put fit for purpose in a forceful way that actually puts across in no uncertain terms to every single part of the systems that are actively still at this second destroying our planet, that need to be held accountable, that are still getting away with so much. I think people within the Green Party now have to actually put the way that they actually fight within the party for the greater good of the environment and the climate, they have to do things differently. That obviously will be the subject of much discussion and much enlightenment, if I can put it like that. So I feel that they now need to, if I can put it like this, to regroup. Yeah. And they need to embrace their challenges in a more effective way, because at the moment it's still not happening effectively enough. I think that would be one of the key points that I put across on the way that the Green people within the Green Party function, because I have noticed this. I mean, a couple of wins are neither here nor there. You're not going to be a major political Green voice within any given government with only winning a couple of seats at an election. I'm sure that other people like myself have noticed that in its context. So I would say that so much more needs to be done now to redefine that the way that the minds of the people in the Green Party work. And I would say regroup and rethink the way that you apply yourselves within that party, and the way you apply yourselves to taking on board the people that the public, and the way that you fight for the given environmental and climate policies that you're trying to fight to put in place. So that would be probably my main advice on that issue. But green politics, if I can expand a bit further, Andrea, I wasn't sure
Yep.
whether you needed to say anything else at that
No,
particular.
I suppose one of the things, I see in Australia, the Green Party's
Sure.
of a reason. It's a reasonable size, and then you've got the Teals, which are a whole
Yeah.
bunch of independents that came together.
Yeah.
It's like in the UK and in the US, they just never get any traction.
This is
So,
one of the major problems, Andrea,
yeah.
actually. And it does need addressing with the proper level of commitment that's not been there.
Yeah.
This is one of the things, the key issues in the course of my work that I find so frustrating. It's called a key level of commitment within certain individuals and organizations. It's still not there. That's why we're doing things in the same old, tired, failed ways that are getting us absolutely nowhere. And we wonder why we still have accountability issues. We have a global media, if I can just diversify for a second, but it's all linked. It's all relevant, I promise you. We have a global media that's sleepwalking by the day, as I keep saying. Holding global media accountability from Sky News to ABC News to NBC News to BBC Breaking to all the major newspapers, Guardian, Telegraph, you name it. Holding that media accountable is a job that cannot be taken and must not be taken lightly, but it still is by so many people. In fact, when it comes to the public don't even realize that the media are filling their minds with misinformation and disinformation and have been on the climate emergency for decades. The actual source of information that should be being given to the public is being swept under the carpet and misinterpreted and turned into an affair that is actually leaving public minds with the thinking that, oh, it's just a bit of bad weather. It's not serious. It doesn't matter. It's okay. Okay, we've just got some floods. The weather's changed a bit. They don't. If I can put this into context, the public don't, mass public don't even. A lot of them aren't even able to differentiate the difference between weather and climate. And this is another issue, again, that's of major concern globally. And another issue in terms of educating the public in a mass way that is absolutely relevant to every single green and ecological party out there that is trying to be able to educate the public properly. And still has ability in getting the message across, because the message is not being got across properly in the right ways. And of course, the public minds are being filled with this disinformation and have been for so long from a global media that is intent, and still the media is committed to downplaying the climate emergency as I speak now. It's still, you look at the global media as a whole. Yeah, in fact, here's an example. Have a think about major national newspapers. And have you seen a major national newspaper cover the intensity of these extreme weather events on the front page every day? Have you seen that happen? No. Because you see, the thing is, we have journalists within these organizations, and I've said this before. I'm not trying to be controversial here, but I'm afraid to say these things have to be said, and they must be said. Because we need to revolutionize the way that climate is talked about within the press and within the media. It's one of my ongoing purposes on X, along with all my ecological and education stuff, to actually push the media into that context of actually finally putting their hands up and saying, we got this badly wrong, folks. We realize we're going to hold accountability here, that we've got this very, very wrong, and the public have not been given the facts on climate collapse. The public are still not given the facts on climate collapse. And this is one of the major issues that has to be tackled in its entirety. Otherwise, if we continue on the path of the way the mechanics of media work now, it's not just my voice saying it, but you listen to the major scientists of our planet. Then in a decade, there's going to be very, very little left of a habitable planet.
So, Robert, I want to expand on the media conversation, because while I was trying to understand the US election result and how I got it wrong, one of the things that I came across is 70% of the US population doesn't trust mainstream media, so that's unbelievable. 70%, right? Yeah, not surprising, but they trust other sources, And that sphere of influence to me is actually the sphere that we need to be focused on. What are they saying? What are they not saying? But also the red sphere versus the blue sphere is very, very different. Like the red is huge. Like Joe Rogan sits in the red sphere of influence, and I don't have an opinion one way or another on him, but he does have a big influence, right? So how do we get people like him to talk about it in a way that it needs? So I think we almost need to. So it's the media is for a long time they did, once social media came into play, they didn't know how to make any money. So they make money by being, getting people to click on sensational articles, right? And so it's a business challenge that they haven't been able to overcome. We need to be funding and subscribing to the media that we do support and believe in, and who are doing a good job. So I do that. I encourage anyone who can afford to do that to make sure they're paying for media that's doing a good job, so that they can actually do their job. But then we've got a lot of the oligarchs owning the media. And they're also the people sitting in that background that I was talking about earlier with Trump and his team. So I think there's a lot of different aspects to the media conversation now. They either need to rebuild trust as well as work out how to have a business, or we need to completely rethink media. We need to completely rethink politics. But we need a global transformation on a scale we've never seen anyway. So to me, they're all just part of the same story, right?
Absolutely, Andrea. Some great points there. I couldn't agree with you more. We now have a necessary capacity to actually change the face of global media as we've known it since its invention. Basically, it is that dire, it is that serious, and it is that important. I will say that the way that, as I said, the media is not functioning fit for purpose on this crisis. When you have a media that puts the most trivial events on the front of national and global newspapers by the day over a climate emergency that will affect 8 billion lives, I think that says it all in the fact that the way that the media is being run and being managed. Obviously, one of our key problems is that oligarchs are the puppets, and the journalists are on those strings, probably manipulated. As I've always said before, and I've always suspected, their every move manipulated into dumbing down this crisis, which they are so aptly able to do and have done and continue to do by the decade. But I'm afraid to say the manipulation time is over now. The show's over on that. The game's over on the level of collapse. The level of collapse is unprecedented. We've only need to see those Valencia floods to see that community after community will be washed away. And that will be coming to the United Kingdom, to a community near you very soon. And it's not just me saying it. You look at other posts from prominent people, i.e. Matthew Todd, for example, who's a respected writer who covers a lot of climate stuff, and all the other respected climate scientists and people who you would want to listen to, wouldn't you, in terms of, getting that knowledge necessary in order to be, how can I put it, educated in what's going on around us. This is massive. It's huge. We have a media here, as I said, that's being manipulated by some very, very powerful voices and some very, very rich people who are determined, even at this stage in the crisis, of dumbing down this emergency. As I said, it's how we turn this around now that will be critical. That's one of my key speaking points on the work I do on X in terms of speaking about media accountability, because it's something I keep banging on about, is media accountability. Because you see, the public expect the media to be able to report to them the facts. And as I said, when you have this issue of the media not being capable of being able to report the facts properly, as I said, because of this blanket almost silence in a way. I mean, we look at. Sorry, I've just seen a graph coming up on my screen. I don't know.
I wanted to show you the media's bias chart.
Thanks, Andrew. I wasn't sure that I was pressed something.
So basically,
I've never seen this before.
So it's very interesting. So the top sort of green box they're sort of left and right, but sort of consistent, telling the truth, no misinformation, disinformation, propaganda, and then you go down, and that's when you start getting a little bit left and right. But there's another image, and if you go down on the right hand side, it goes really far down, it goes really wide and really deep. There's a lot more of that misinformation and disinformation on the right hand side. So we do like the media landscape, then the bias in the media is really it's a significant problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. Thanks for sharing that with us. Thought I pressed something wrong on my screen then. I thought
no, you were talking about the media and I had to add it. It's not just the media, right? So they're, it's also us as consumers of information, right? And that's the other thing. So I mean, there's so many layers of responsibility in the mix. So the people who predominantly voted for Trump don't follow any political news. The people who predominantly voted for Harris do follow political news. Just that, right? So, the shiny things, the 30-second sound bites, people don't want to listen to big, complicated conversations around the climate crisis, and yet they'll spend 3 hours listening to Joe Rogan do a podcast. So
exactly, you've exemplified it perfectly there. To be
exactly.
honest.
So people are willing to spend time listening to information, but they're not willing to spend time to listen to complicated information. And people say to me, "Oh, just give me one thing that we need to do." And I'm like, "It's not one thing, and it's impossible." Okay, I'll give you one thing: learn, spend time with information, learn. So I think we've got to take some responsibility here as well.
We have,
of course. I mean, ultimately, for me, it's really, really simple in that sense. And I'm not sure I'm quite as cynical as Robert, but I'm pretty close. And I think media, like everything else, is a business. It's been a very bad business for 2 decades because of basically the ability to find information or news for free, predominantly on the internet. So you are desperate to sell. I'm at the point I don't watch news anymore. It's so dumbed down, and basically you have made news into a consumption event or entertainment event, because we are not actually prepared to pay for news because we expect it to be free. And what you then get is basically the rise of people like Joe Rogan, and actually the rise of people like us, who are commenting on the news, because proper investigative journalism costs a lot of money. But we as consumer collectively, we are not prepared to pay anymore for actually deep delving journalism, because we expect it to be free. But we cannot have it both ways. So for us as consumers, you actually need to pay. And I think it's interesting to see that specialist publications and very niched forms of news and investigative journalism actually thrives, because they are prepared to charge a very narrow audience who's prepared to spend a lot of money on very specific things. But the mainstream media is a terrible business to be in, because people are not prepared to pay for it. So you are always going to deviate towards the news that creates clickbaits and reads. And I'm not sure, climate crisis on the front page does that, but the royal wedding probably does, because that's how a lot of people's mind are wired.
And Kim Kardashian's ass, right?
Well, you can't have royal wedding cancelled due to flooding or something. I mean, that would be a nice front page, but you don't even get that. And I think the whole, I mean, all of these things basically, our infrastructure, our whole kind of structure of industrial politics and kind of governance is geared towards a world where there are no boundaries. You can keep on doing what you like, and you can keep expanding along. Mm-hmm. And we are facing the fundamental lesson of nature. Kind of, you cannot have everything. No one can have everything. And it's really hard for people to appreciate that. The only way before, when we had been able to think in those terms, was governments, when we wanted to, how did nations form, was out of fighting wars because they wanted to have a little bit more of their neighbors. And that's kind of the context of what we think about. We're trying to actually say, we created all these things so that we can have everything. We're not trying to get them to turn around so that we can recognize we can't have everything.
Absolutely.
That's a hard lesson. That's a genuinely harsh lesson. And that's where a lot of the anger and the reactions coming from. It's not because you don't know this is happening, because you just have to look out the window. It's not like we're in the 1970s and people are complaining in the first Earth Day about what, and you look around and think everything is booming. What are you on about? So you just have to win. And then you suddenly find, a few days ago, I'm in London, and it was, I was in my T-shirt, and then it's freezing cold over a day.
Yeah.
So
absolutely, yeah. You've made some great points there, to be honest with you. And of course, also Richard. I'm still looking at the names again. I'm sorry. I'm still a bit bleary. I do apologize again. So anyway, some good points there. I completely agree with you. One of our fundamental problems is obviously in terms of speaking about the way that media is funded and the way that the content of media is actually financed across our planet. This is the thing. It's what sells newspapers. Obviously, I'm constantly reminded about that within my work of every single day that goes by. And what sells newspapers are the most trivial events and sometimes most pathetic events that you could ever wish for. That are put on the front of the tabloid press and continue to be, because obviously the public don't want to read this so-called, in inverted brackets, doomsday affair of a mass extinction. So why on earth would you want to put dramatic detail of floods, hurricanes, wildfires engulfing community by community on the front of your newspapers? You wouldn't even want to go there. So that's why these things are not put on the front of newspapers, but it's a double-edged sword in the way I see it, because if you don't inform the public adequately to what's happening in the context that needs to be said that isn't being said, you'll rule the day that you didn't inform the public properly. You'll rule the day simply because of the public that we'll come to a situation where the events of what we're seeing by the day will just as I said, completely engulf every community. This isn't me being doomsdayish about it. This is facts. This is actual real climate science now, as playing out before our eyes. Even scientists are terrified of what's going on. If you think I'm making those words up, I'm sadly not, because you only need to look at what Peter Kalmus, a NASA climate scientist in America, has been saying for decade after decade. He's terrified of what's happening towards the climate. There's a lot of other prominent and well-respected climate scientists that are equally terrified of the extent of level of collapse that's engulfing us across our planet. And if that isn't serious enough to be taken seriously by the media, then I don't know what is.
Did you see Gavin Schmidt's comment this week? So he heads up the NASA Goddard Institute. Did you see?
I haven't caught up with that yet, Andrea. I'm sorry to say.
New York Times, I think.
Right.
And I'm going to swear, but he basically said we have no fucking idea. Which, for a climate scientist, they don't usually swear, especially someone like Gavin. But I mean, he's been pretty. He said like I think it was in March, if we don't understand why we're heating like this by August, then we really are in uncharted territory. And so just this last week, he's basically said we have no fucking idea what's going on, right?
Exactly it,
yeah. When someone like that's saying something like that, it's like we should be paying attention, because he's talking about the slow process of climate science. A lot of the data that we're looking at 7 years, 10 years old. There's a lot of information that what's going on in Antarctica. How much the scientists can be there for a couple of months a year and then they can't be there. The permafrost melt that's starting to really, really escalate. There's a video in the Weekend Reads that I've shared on it. It's just this acceleration, which is something that I've always seen as coming, because when you start asking questions and you go through all the threads of the climate emergency, biodiversity, novel entities, you name it, and Stockholm Institute released its plastics report this week as well. Did you all see that? which basically
I
saying,
have seen a little bit of it, but
Yeah.
I've still got to catch up a little bit more on the
Yeah.
information from that, to be honest
So
with you.
I should have saved the image for that one, but basically the plastics novel entities are making all of the 9 planetary boundaries worse. You know, we're waiting for the plastics treaty. You know, are we finally going to get the message? You know, so yeah, it's a complicated one, but I was just going to suggest, should we move on to the far right? David, did you want to ask this one?
Yeah. So let me just get my thoughts. I've kind of lost it a bit in the conversation.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think the point is that, you know, the people are moving very much towards the far right, and in some senses to the comment you talk about the media, and a lot of young people have shifted in that way. You know, in the UK, for example, although Labour won the election by a landslide in seats, something like 4 million voters voted for reform, additional in that way, and Labour only got extra 500,000. So how do you think about, you know, what needs, how you want to address that, and what does the far right mean?
I think there's some great. Sorry, Andrea, was I in?
No,
I didn't.
I was just going to say, like, I'd love to know if you think that fascism is inevitable. You know,
I tell you something, Andrea. As far as I've been on this planet for quite a while now, fascism. Although we have to grin and I don't know whether the words "grin and bear it" are ever enough. It's one of the most dangerous and radical destroyers of humanity that you could possibly wish for. I will say that there is no place for fascism on our planet. There never has been, and we can see through history what fascism does to not only to the public, but to entire civilizations and to people in mass. I think that we have to continue to objectively rid our societies of fascism to the very best of our abilities, if I can put it like that. It's an ongoing and constant battle in order to keep dangerous and radical thoughts at bay that are the destroyers of human minds. Let's be under no illusions about that. Fascism is so dangerous in all its capacities. And I'm afraid to say this rise, and a disturbing rise in my mind of what I can see in the global events of the world as they are at the moment. I think a dangerous rise in fundamentalism and fascism that is trying to infect, and it does infect minds. It does that very, very capably. Because if it's allowed to fester and it's allowed to grow, fascism in any capacity will destroy people's ability to be able to act in a democratic manner, to be able to act for the greater good of the people. As we see time and time again, we only need to see global events with wars taking place. I know I'm diversifying slightly, but it is relevant, so bear with me. Fascism, as it is in Russia with Putin, it says it all. We have a tyrannical dictator who will stop at absolutely nothing to crush countries with a finger. Obviously, I don't need to elaborate too much because we're all fully aware of what his intentions were for Ukraine and still continue to be. A dedication to destroying people's lives en masse without the slightest thought other than just to exemplify and glorify his own, warped dictatorship ideals, if I can put it like that. So fascism, in my mind, it does have to be continue to be held accountable seriously, because we cannot let that level of dangerous mindset engulf the world on a global scale, because if we do, we really are done for. If we let fascism control minds of people en masse from country to country, it isn't acceptable. I'm trying to speak with a democratic tone in all I say here, but I do honestly believe that it's absolutely vital. I'm seriously worried, actually, about the mental state of a huge majority of the American people at the moment, that they could have been brainwashed so easily by I mean, I don't know whether you guys here agree with me, but I see Trump as a tyrannical dictator who wants to shut down democracy. He wants to shut down free speech. He wants to take away the freedoms and liberties of the American people that are so ingrained in what the America stands for: freedom, liberty, democracy, and the ability to be able to be unified in thoughts and minds for the decency and the common good of all. He's trying to take that away. He's trying to take countless liberties away from the American people. He's trying to dumb down organizations. I don't need to explain to you about the Trump 2025 project. And the sort of horrors that are supposedly expected from this guy that could implement these things. But I will say this: it's very, very dangerous. It's a very, very dark cloud that's over America at the moment and continues to be. And this business of fascism, it's already infected the greater part of America, in the fact that Trump has been elected like this, as going to be put in as a sitting president for, what is it, a 4-year term, is it, or a 5-year term? And I'm afraid to say that this level of, how can I put it, this level of collapse that's taken place within American politics, because believe me, that's what it is. I feel for Kamala, because she put up a hell of a fight, and I didn't expect the result to be what it was, if I'm all honest with you. That's what I said earlier on. Devastated by the result with Trump in, because I know how categorically wounding it's going to be for the American people. And it will be. And not just the American people, as I've said before, but the world. But anyway, speaking collectively and staying on topic with this subject of fascism, which is what I'm trying to do here, it's very dangerous. It absolutely destroys minds, it destroys lives, it destroys freedoms, it destroys liberties, and it destroys governments, and a lot more besides. And I'm afraid to say that in the American environment and the global environment, God knows how much destruction is going to be inflicted upon it within the next 4 or 5 years, if I can say that, in terms of what's going to be happening with Trump's ability of hand of destruction. He's already I think, committed to investing in more oil, more drilling, which is an absolute catastrophe for this ongoing climate emergency. It cannot be shouted loudly enough. As I've said before, if we think that we're in trouble now, and we are in deep, deep, dire trouble, and none of our global governments in their present capacity, with the way that they function and the mechanisms within those governments' functions, are going to get to the task of what's actually objectively needed now, with the way that the workings of them continue to be. I keep on sounding this like a broken record. In fact, whenever I'm on my many appearances on the Climate Crisis Club, I keep on delving into these realms of subjectivity and accountability, and the fact of government's mechanisms ceasing to function for the greater good of the environment, the climate, or the people. And I just keep on seeing like I'm repeating myself in the same tired old ways, but I keep on pushing it out there because it very much has to be said. And the more people and the more influential people and the more governments and the more politicians that actually listen to these words that are being said, the better it will be for all in the way that we subjectively tackle this emergency. I do apologize for going on to climate when we were supposed to be talking about fascism. But I did feel that what I'm just saying now did gel with what I was trying to explain on that comment that was asked to me about fascism. We have to continue in my mind, to be vigilant, and we have to continue to make sure that it does not take over our planet, because we know that if it did completely take over our planet, how events will unfold. We only need to look at certain wars to understand that tyrannical fascism, when out of control, can end very, very badly for millions and millions, if not billions of people. So I hope that touches on your answer a bit on fascism there, Andrea, to answer the question.
Yeah, it worries me. David, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I do want to say I was speaking with a friend who was talking about how, the Reform Party was trying to work out how to have a genuine climate policy that works with its supporters. And I think there is this part, we talk about, and this is sort of from our own sense, right? So there's this part where people want to be able to know their choice, to bring together a number of things. So the media and the information is really important. You can't choose if you don't know what you're choosing. So that's really important there. The comment that Robert made about the confusion between weather and climate and what that means. The piece that's really missing in all of this is the connection to economics. What does it mean to the dollar, the pound, or the euro, or the shilling, or whatever it is that's in your pocket, when, as Andrea talked earlier in the show, the farmer that you talked about is devastated with the floods and the crops are gone in that way? What does that mean for your daily economics in that way? How is those price changes not what central banks can deal with? And how our economics is failing because you'll be working all day trying to earn money and you find you can't keep up with your bills.
That's
that
absolutely
connection is totally missing in the press.
Yeah.
Without that connection, you can't make your choices. You think the economy is directing you towards one thing and that'll be okay. And so your pressure on governments is to keep sustaining the same repeated mistakes. And
yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. Some great points.
I was just going to say, Ollie's obviously woken up and he's here to join us, the grumpy old man.
Okay.
I want to go back to what you were saying. When I was sort of coming to terms with the big story, the poly crisis, I was like, if we don't understand this as a global society, if our leaders don't talk about it, if our media doesn't talk about it, the obvious outcome is going to be, if like I said, if you're not paying attention to the information and you're going to go and vote for somebody without actually paying attention to what you're voting for, you're not going to necessarily understand the implications of that. So people are voting for the strong man, strong woman with the simple answers to the complex problems. And it's a complex problem, so there are no simple answers. And like David was saying, not all of the information is there. But the other thing is the amount of gaslighting that's going on. So I was really digging into the concept of gaslighting the other day because, the trans debate. So some incredible percentage of Trump voters, 82%, believed that prisoners were going through what's that surgery called when they change sex? That's a term.
Transgender, isn't it?
Transgender surgery, right? Okay, so Trump actually made that legal in prisons, but in his time from 2016, there was no transgender surgery in prison. During Biden's era, 2 prisoners had the surgery. And this was a major issue in the politics, in the campaign, right? A major, major issue. We're hearing about, trans girls in sport, bathrooms, all this stuff, right? And I don't think the Democrats paid enough attention to those issues because they just didn't think that they were important, but they were really, really important to the people who voted for Trump. And so I think there's that. But the amount of gaslighting, you're talking about free speech, right? Is free speech also the ability to share false information, misinformation, disinformation?
It can be, Andrea, actually. Some good points from you there. It can be. It's a double-edged sword again. It's one of those things that is, it's an issue of critical analysis, obviously. But it's also an issue that can be blurred. It's an issue that can be manipulated, unlike so many other issues, in my mind.
I think it has to be. You have to accept. You can't have it both ways.
Well,
I'm a massive advocate of free speech because I think it goes hand in hand with prosperity. For me, the debate about fascism is actually about prosperity. Fascism thrives when a large part of the population economically is worse off. And the same for communism. And the fact is that the kind of brand of capitalism we have had in the last 20 years hasn't made it better for a large part of people on this planet. It's made it significantly better for a very small part. But you are going to see that rise in extreme politics, because actually I'm worse off. And in the media, it's being portrayed as if everyone is better off.
I'd like to bring this back to something
I'm
Robert
not, so I'm going to lean towards the extreme forces of politics.
So is it inevitable then?
Well, I'd like to bring it back to something Robert said at the beginning, which is, the physics always wins. So, whatever we think of all of this, I think it's very, very worthwhile to keep in mind. All the gaslighting and all of those things is still going to have to face the reality that is happening to the physical world.
Absolutely. Yeah. I couldn't agree with you more. Yeah, this is exactly what it is. The reality is the dictator at the end of the day. The reality will decide, because we are in events here that the public cannot control. Governments are incapable of being able to understand in context fully as they should be at this present time. And the reality is something that is continuing to bite us by the tail, by the second, by the day. Our economic policies are failing us anyway, globally. We have economic policies totally dedicated to total destruction of the natural and environmental world and the climate as I speak now. And while we continue on that path of economic policies in the way that they are geared, the way their mechanisms are geared, the way they are geared to big businesses, the way they are geared to corporates, the way they are geared to politicians, the way they feed out of the hands of oligarchs who control them all like puppets on a string, we are not going to be able to take serious and concrete action on this sixth mass extinction that we face. It's one of the fundamental facts that sooner or later the entire planet is going to have to wake up to. It won't have any choice in the matter, because when you have community after community, infrastructure after infrastructure beaten to death, put underwater, set on fire, wildfires burned away, I'm afraid to say that that's physics telling you that it's game over for our consumer-driven profit at the expense of life itself, civilization. So we are intensified with the events that are happening. We're in very, very dark times mentally. And unless we can mentally get ourselves out by thinking critically in the ways that need to be thought, because what we have to understand here collectively as a global humanity, we have to understand that walking on this path of pure profit by the second is actually snuffing out our lives and snuffing out our kids' lives. Because just think of this a minute. Our kids will probably, if they ever get to our ages, our kids will be inheriting very, very, I don't know, my screen froze in for a minute. I also was off the line then. So our kids will be inheriting so little that this profit driven at the expense of human life itself will mean absolutely nothing in the next 30 or 40 years. And indeed, the level of collapse that I keep on banging on, that I've said before, like a broken record. I don't want to have to keep on being here, keep telling people about the total collapse of the way our economies and civilizations are geared in terms of blanketing humanity with the wrong way of doing things. If I didn't have to, believe me, I'd like to be able to see our economies and everything that constructs our societies for what they are, actually geared to being fit for purpose. But I'm afraid to say that I have to say what I have to say on the issue, because it's such critical importance that it does have to be said. And I'm afraid harsh realities are not being taken on board by some of the most powerful people on our planet. And that really is the level of ignorance. Ignorance is one thing, but you can elevate your mind from ignorance if you understand the importance of learning about critical facts. And that's something I see around. Sorry, did someone speak?
No, I was just interrupted because you prompted me along, and there's this thing which we Richard and I have talked before, and we started this series this time with Andrea on acceptance, and I think there's this part where you flip back the other way on the opposite of that which is the denial. And we are all, in sense, what you're describing is that there is that denial of the things that you're saying.
Absolutely.
And the essence of that denial goes down to a real kind of hard thing to imagine that things can actually change. I think when you listen to politics and you listen to that, people often ends up in a situation of effectively saying in one form or another, that's just how things are. We can't change it.
Yeah.
And that's the crucial denial. That somehow the disbelief that things can change. You have to project yourself into the world that you're kind of describing, as Robert is saying, and imagine that future so that you can actually believe that things can change.
Absolutely, David. I completely agree with you. Some great points there. This subjective ability to be able to put yourself in that position is of critical importance, and I can't stress it loudly enough, if I can put it like that, how important being able to function like that mentally is. There is this blanket fog, I think, of mentality that's still festering in the concepts that our economy, in the way that it's geared, can actually continue to function in its capacity. This is something else that I can talk about at great length, and it could probably generate a very, very long discussion. I shouldn't imagine. But I will say that
we should get you back for that one.
I do hope you will, Andrea, to be honest.
Right. Anytime.
If you can put up with my ability to, scale the surface of things that need to be talked about, I appreciate the airtime, I have to say.
I'm all about it. But I think, when I was listening to you, it's like all the people that really get where we are and what it means and where we're going and all those sort of wonderful things. I just don't think we can give up. I don't think we can give up trying to share this message, even though it's not, and people don't want to hear it. Like, trust me, I've been in some really hard situations. I don't want to hear it, but we've got to illustrate it. I was talking to a friend the other day, and everyone who knows me knows I'm talking about this stuff all the time. Absolutely. And I said to them, how you sort of coping with it? And they said, I just can't. It's too much. I just can't. I don't even want to go there. And I said, well, have you at least changed your behavior? Buying less clothes, getting out of the car, moving to a smaller house, using less energy, or 5 articles of clothing a year. Have you at least done that? And they're like, no, I haven't even started. Right. So my message to people now is just like, just do what you can in your sphere of influence, and just shrink your impact and see your impact. Don't sit in front of me with a plastic bottle of water, because I'm the one that can't say anything, because then I'm rude, right? You're living in a country you can get water out of a tap, then there's no excuse for getting a bottle of water in a plastic bottle that's going to last for 500 years, because this is your kid's future, right? So it's that sort of thing. But I want to just finish with a question. How do you think politicians around the world, and you put this on Twitter, and I thought it was a really good way of putting it, how should politicians around the world engage and fundamentally act towards climate policies? Tell us your dream. Tell us your vision.
Is that question for me first, Andrea, or is it for Dave?
Yeah. No, it's for you, Robert.
For me. Yeah. So some great points there, Andrea. I firmly believe now in the way that politicians must actually put the message across. They must actually be informed in the right ways that they've been sadly lacking in so far. I'm afraid to say that this is what's necessary in my mind. All politicians who want to be serious and be responsible in the way that they see and act towards the climate emergency, they must now actually basically almost take a crash course in reading about the climate science. They must take a crash course in the climate crisis. They must learn all the data that they can do from climate scientists and climate science data. They must actually get on board now and take it seriously. Education is what is needed now from our global politicians. If they've never got serious about educating their minds and their mentalities to climate collapse, they must now read the data at least to some capacity enough to empower them to actually make responsible decisions for people's lives and their communities. So in answering that question categorically, Andrea, I hope I'm doing that for you. Education will be key for all politicians to be able to understand the emergency for what it is, because at the moment we have masses and masses of politicians globally that still do not understand the implications of what a climate emergency is. They don't understand the implications of extreme weather events. They don't understand all the other extremities involved, which include mass starvation, drought, water shortages, and all the other difficulties which are associated, mass crop failures, the mass inability to grow food, soil erosion, and the sterile nature of the way soils can go under the climatic conditions of an ever-changing climate, which we are seeing in so many countries, having crop failures and having mass starvation, mass water shortages. They need to understand all the implicating factors that make up what a climate emergency is. So I hope I'm explaining this comprehensively enough, that they must educate themselves. Politicians must do that for the greater good, not just of themselves, but they must understand what the climate emergency is. Because if they can't educate themselves properly, and we're looking to those people to actually run our governments and run our communities, and they're completely blind in the way that they understand the mechanics of this crisis, they cannot move forward. So I hope that answers your question there, Andrew.
There's no place for ignorance, that's for sure. David, Richard.
Well, for me, everything here goes hand in hand, right? So I think, and I've been feeling for quite some time that the world is ready for a politician that will actually tell people the truth and get elected on the basis that you're telling the truth. So far, I've been proven wrong conclusively everywhere. That there's just a spectra of denial, ignorance, and blatant obfuscation of the events that matter. But somehow, because I actually, contrary to common opinion, I'm a positive at heart. I actually think that we are getting to the point where we are ready to elect an important politician that is actually saying the truth. And because I'm finance, economics field, I often debate these things about fiscal things, because like David has pointed out, for us, what will actually trigger the collapse before we get into the ecological, environmental concerns is that we will run out of money. We will see a global bankruptcy event of the current economic model, because governments will run out of money to prop up their citizens. And being old, I remember the 1994 election in Sweden. It was post-ERM crisis. Sweden had put up rates up to 500%, to defend the currency, and eventually bailed. The housing prices fell a lot because housing doesn't do very well with 500% rates. And you'd run I think at the time, at least, the biggest budget deficit the Western world had ever seen. And it was clear the market was not taking it, and you needed austerity. And this is not the brand of austerity that UK faced. This was proper austerity. And it's the only government I've ever seen actually in the Western world getting elected on promising more austerity. Because citizens understood that this is crap what's going on. We need some radical change. You cannot keep on borrowing these amounts of money and promising, green fields and gold at the end of the rainbow. And I think those things are kind of connected. We are ready to elect politicians that are telling the truth. And inevitably, in that truth, there will be a dose of austerity to get away from promising I can make your life better by stealing from future generations. I find it morally deplorable. And actually, economically, it just doesn't work, because debt levels are too high. We have already borrowed too much, and we're crumbling under debt servicing costs. So you can no longer put off that moment in time when you had to deal with the consequences of what's going on. So I think we are ready to elect politicians that is actually capable of telling people the truth, which so far I've been proven wrong about.
I think we need to have politicians who are willing to actually tell the truth. So to me, that's the thing that's been missing. Like Kamala Harris didn't tell the truth. She didn't.
No, I'd like to add something onto this, actually. The problem we face is a relationship problem with nature. We have a really soured relationship. So just think about your relationship with your partner, whoever that might be, and imagine it has really soured. And you guys are just not speaking with each other anymore. And you're going to say, your friend's going to say, fix it. And what do you say? You say, well, it's complicated. And that's the first truth. You have to embrace that it is complicated and stop thinking that if only I did that and then that will be fine. There's a whole mixture of things that has to come together. That's why you need that honesty about it. You need to face the honesty first. Then all the rest has a chance to come along. But you have to face that very first part of the honesty, is to recognize that what all your friends are telling you is true, that you have a messed up relationship with your partner. And we do have a relationship with nature, who is our partner. And if we don't accept that, it doesn't matter what else going on, you're not going to make that step.
I like the comparison. All right. We've been going over an hour and a half, so should we wrap up? Do you want some final thoughts, Robert?
Yeah, thanks, Andrea. Yeah, I've been delighted to be invited as a guest on this show to meet David and Richard. And of course, you know me well, don't you, Andrea? So, it's been good. It's been a good discussion. And I will say that there has been some great exchanges put here, exchanges of importance and things that need to be ongoingly said, if I can put it like that, because these things in every single political and environmental space and within communities, in everything that we've said is of vital importance to be able to continually put out there. I do have some final views, I guess, on the closing stages of this meeting. I will say our ongoing critical need to be able to educate the public en masse, as I put it, is absolutely vital. The public, I think, as David so aptly put it there, we have lost our vital connection with nature. I keep saying it in my work on X. There's absolutely no doubt about it. We see nature as nothing more than a small lawn in our back garden, and that's it. That's you, nature, half of us. We just see that tiny lawn. We just have to cut, and that's it. We don't even think of flowers. We don't think of the flora and fauna. We don't think of ecosystems. And probably, I would imagine, many of us can't even spell the word ecosystem, sadly. But it has to. We don't think of all the intricacies that actually make up the system that actually is keeping us alive. We don't think about any aspect of that at all. I think there's this abandonment, and there has been for so long now, for decades, in being able to understand that if it wasn't for nature and all the mechanisms within our nature cycle, we wouldn't actually be breathing and speaking and be here now. So many members of the public don't still fully comprehend that. It's a very sad state of affairs. And of course, if our children don't get taught it, they grow up and have children and they never get taught anything about nature. And the whole cycle goes on with so many people not fully being able to understand the complexities and being able to understand the necessity to be able to safeguard nature. We have to reconnect with nature, as I keep saying. I've said it so many times before in the course of my work. It's vital that we all finally understand and appreciate nature for what it is. We have to understand nature's functions properly. If we don't understand nature's capacity to be able to be the heartbeat of keeping us alive, how can we fundamentally start respecting it at levels that we've been sadly neglecting for decades? Being able to understand the mechanics of nature without getting too bogged down in anything serious, but in terms of being able to have public appreciation for making those steps to You have to be able to put it across in an educational way that's not going to frighten them to death. So being able to join the dots comprehensively with understanding that nature's mechanisms are vital to being able to keep us alive, and for us to have to safeguard for the greater good of all our lives is absolutely paramount. I think it comes down to, as I've said so many times before, the more people understand about the ability to safeguard the environmental world around them, the more that can be achieved and the more that can be passed on in terms of knowledge. So I guess really that's my sort of closing on the subject of public nature, because we have lost that vital connection. If we hadn't lost it, we wouldn't be in the situation that we're in.
Yeah.
The mental that we do reconnect, but how quickly we do it will in largely be a case of how committed we are, maybe in our mindsets, to finally appreciating the natural and ecological world around us. You see, when I look at the natural and ecological world around me, I look at the intricacies and the beauty of it, from the leaves, from the trees, to every flower, to a petal, to the air, to the sounds, to the wildlife, the birds, etc., because it's naturally inbuilt in me to appreciate nature. I always have done, but I know that situation is not, sadly, the case for so many other people that don't give it a thought. And I kind of look at people who just don't even think about nature, and our entire is a kind of dumbed down or wired. Nature is wired out from being given a thought. That's why we get mass chopping down trees in our communities, more and more flora and fauna swept aside for this, that, and the other. And it's just, I think, it's truth. This is a situation of it's not denial, but it's actually a situation of very sad ignorance to what are the important factors of the ecological cycle that's paramount for us to be where we are. So that's my closing bits. I hope that's explained it a little. Mechanisms of nature. Yeah.
That's awesome. Definitely follow you on. You're on Blue Sky now as well, right? Because nobody knows what's going on with X, but it's awesome to have you here. And every time you speak, I smile. So because it's so true what you're saying, and I think anyone who knows what they're talking about, please talk up louder. Anyone who's disappearing from the global conversation, please get back into it. I know that there's a lot of people who I've spoken to who their mental health can't be part of the conversation when it gets so nasty. I laugh at the trolls. They don't bother me. I'm a female. You guys have no idea what it's like. If you see the word hysteria being used by the trolls, that's a classic. It's often used against women. It was used against women medically for a long time. There used to be a diagnosis of hysteria when they put them into mental institutions, right? So the word hysteria, it's a very powerful word, but to me, it's just total gaslighting. So just push them aside. They don't matter, because it's not about them. For whatever reason they're doing that, it's not about them. It's about our kids. It's about their future. And it's about the poorest people in the world. That's who I'm fighting for, not just my own children and everyone's children, but the poorest people in the world who, they're around me. I spent 7 years in Thailand. They're just living down the street in tin huts, going through heat extremes and floods, right? So, yeah, we've got to re-engage. And to me, that's the other thing. It's not just the disconnect from nature, but we've also disconnected from the global conversation because it's become too ugly. And that's, I believe, where fascism takes hold, when we don't continue to take responsibility, and we've got to build our communities. Really, we've got to cross divides. We've got to do whatever we can to build the community. So that's something that I think is really important.
Absolutely, Andrea. I couldn't agree with you more. And a couple of closing points for myself, for what they're worth. We must continue to speak coherently. We must speak objectively to as many people as possible within all organizations, and we must make our voices heard, and the critical importance of reconnecting with nature, our environment, understanding how important our climate is. We must put those things to test. So that's a couple more closing words from me.
Ollie's just said, bang on, stay loud and get hysterical. Richard, David?
Well, a few words that you mentioned along community. That's really important there.
Yeah.
And one thing that came up in conversation recently, you know, what happens when the world effectively, as Richard says, that runs out of money and all the rest of it. And, you know, you mentioned about fascism before and all of those things and governments and stuff. We are in a very different world. Knowledge is very different. The high school kid in everywhere has a lot more knowledge today than, you know, the feudal lord back in whenever it was.
Yeah.
Our ability to do things on a community and individual level far exceeds the level any previous point in our past.
Mm-hmm.
And we must remember that we are so capable. And it's the small steps that create the problems. You know, the small pieces of plastics and stuff. And it'll be the small steps that brings it back.
Mm.
So don't all ignore that it is always the small steps, the accumulations of small steps that will turn it one way or bring it back the other.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more, David. Some great points there. I just wanted a couple of points that Richard said I completely agree with. This business of the world running out of money, it is of critical importance that so many people are not understanding. People of prominence, people within the mechanisms of government that are failing to join the dots, etc., etc. But I will say that I think we have to subjectively now take a long, hard, clinical look immediately in the way the financial aspects of things that are mechanisms within our planet are worked and governed at this very moment. It's of critical importance. The money doesn't go on forever. There will be, there will come to that situation, as David, as Richard said, of us having a mass affair of a bankruptcy of such like that will absolutely cripple government organizations and all the mechanisms within it from being able to function with any coherence at all. I also
you should read their book, Robert, The Unsustainable Truth. It's a really fantastic sort of overview of that economic story. It's really interesting.
Yeah, a couple. I hope I'm not running over, Andrea, but just something else I want before the show goes over. That, in my honest opinion, that the millions and trillions that are actually put, as I continue to speak now, in fossil fuel subsidies, because what should be now disbanded from that use, as I keep on fighting for, and used for the economic greater good of governments and the implications for green transitions as well, amongst other things, to be able to make our economies function fit for purpose, not just for now, for the future as well. As I said, put into fossil fuel subsidies that are continuing to fuel this crisis that we see. That in now my mind, new laws must be put in place to categorically put an end to that. But that's another story, and I can talk at length when you want.
All right, we're gonna get you back. We're gonna extend. Richard, final words, and we'll wrap up.
Stay positive, and everything you do actually matters. It goes back to individual accountability. You cannot have the right to voice your opinion and express what you think if you don't also face the consequences and accept the responsibility of your actions. Simple. You do what you can. It's not going to be different for you and me and David and Robert. But whatever we do, it's on our responsibility, and our actions do matter, however small they are. Absolutely. In every respect.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, Robert, thank you. You've been awesome. I was very curious to see how Richard and David would enjoy having you here, and it looks like I can see your smiles on your face, so it looks like you did enjoy it.
Absolutely.
So really great to listen to what you had to say.
Thank you. Thank you, Robert.
Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you, Richard. And
thank you.
Thank you.
We'll be back for our final show of the year, which is on the 6th of December. December. Did I say December?
Yeah.
It's almost weird, almost December, right? And we're gonna potentially talking about how do you thrive, because a lot of people are sitting in fear, and we want to help people to step out of fear. To me, stepping out of fear is stepping into action. But there's a lot of people who've been commenting. Eusta, did I say it correct? We had Ollie, David. You were talking about partnering in Africa. We're happy to just reach out to me on LinkedIn. We've had some other people jumping on here, so it's been really nice to have some good engagement in the chat. And we'll see you in a couple of weeks. But thanks, guys. All right.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Take care.